if there is going to be a general election before 2029, I suspect it's the bond market that will determine it. Who is the governor of the Bank of England is very, very important. And if we get a dud from Labour, we will have to act.
Hello and welcome back to Southbank Investment Research's YouTube channel to Nigel Farage. It's been more than a year since we last spoke. You've taken up a very different way of trying to help people with their financial future. You're trying to save the UK government itself.
Well, that's right, Nick, and thank you. It's good to be back. Yes, I've gone all full political over the course of the last year, but, you know, money and finance are at the very heart of it because we're living in a country with no growth. And frankly, had it not been for mass immigration, there would have been no growth for the last decade and more. Had it not been for excessive government borrowing, there would have been no growth at all. So we have a UK economy where productivity, both in the private and public sector, has fallen. Unemployment has gone through the roof, but we mask it as disability benefits or whatever else it may be. The work ethic, sadly, is diminishing. The country is getting poorer. And of course, you know, you look at 10 and 30-year yields on British government bonds, gilts, you see they're even higher than they were than at the peak of the Liz Truss crisis or so-called crisis of 2022. So I do think that, you know, economics and politics, as they always have been, are inextricably linked. And what do I want to do? I want to help entrepreneurship. I want to help men and women that you know, basically want to have a go and set up businesses. People who vote for me are what I call alarm clock Britain. They actually get up in the morning and go to work. You know, it sounds pretty basic, but that's where we are. And they increasingly resent their next door neighbours who don't work, who choose not to work, and are almost as well off as they are. And very interesting. I mean, stats, you know, now, you know, if you're on a couple of disability benefits, you're better off than somebody working 37 and a half hours a week on minimum wage. So yeah, here we are. And unless we turn things around, you know, we are going to go bust, along with much of the Western world. That's just how serious things are.
But Nigel, Labour's sorted all of this out in its first year of government, hasn't it?
She hasn't got a clue. I mean, don't make me laugh. She even lied on the CV. She said 10 years an economist at the Bank of England. You've got to be joking. She's, as my colleague Lee Anderson called her in Parliament, Rachel from accounts, or more accurately, Rachel from complaints. Unqualified, not up to the job, no comprehension of what she's doing, but it's worse than that. It's worse than that because there are 25 men and women in the cabinet, and 24 of them have never worked in private business, let alone set up their own company or tried to do something. And the one that did went bust pretty quickly. So we have a government, they are public sector, they are human rights lawyers, they are North London elite, and they seem to think that growth comes from increasing the size of the public sector, and they couldn't be more wrong.
Yeah, and they also want to direct where that growth occurs. Personally, I would much prefer someone from complaints running the Treasury than having someone from the Bank of England. But let's focus on what we actually predicted in the Fleet Street letter in January of 2024. So this is going back a long time before the election. We anticipated what was in the secret manifesto of Labour. One of the things we had a chuckle about at the time is that Labour was busy ruling out more policies than they'd actually come up with. And one of the things we suggested was that they might have to actually implement most of the things that they'd ruled out, making the whole election campaign a bit of a joke. How's that prediction fared?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, they've come for all sorts of different groups of people. I mean, the inheritance tax on family farms, quite astonishing, the sheer damage that's doing. Winter fuel allowance, well, you know what? The reason I care about that is because we have the highest energy prices in the world. On net zero, all the policies that Ed Miliband's announcing is going to push our energy bills even higher, which will lead to more deindustrialization. I mean, they don't believe in God, but they do believe in net zero. This is the new, you know, we must all bow down before it. They're going to come for cash ISAs. They will even come for private pensions in a bigger way than they did last time. And everything about them is against thrift. And the one thing that we couldn't have predicted, we were right. We were right to say they would do an awful lot of things they weren't talking about. But the one thing we couldn't have predicted is, and I'm going to call it the exodus. There is literally an exodus from this country. Do you know, in the course of the last year, 40,000 British people have gone to Dubai alone. 40,000 just to Dubai. And yet, sure, a lot of these are wealthy non-doms. A lot of these are, very, very high net worth individuals that lived in Chelsea, Kensington, areas like that. But we're also losing the 30-somethings. We're also losing the ambitious. We're also losing the entrepreneurial. We're also losing the highly qualified. And I particularly apply that to sectors like tech, AI, you name it. They're fleeing all over the world. You've got Milan competing on tax. Lisbon has been competing on tax. Athens has now joined the party, competing on tax. Dubai's booming. Switzerland's always been a haven. And with the modern world, the West Coast, is very, very inviting. We've not seen a brain drain in Britain since the late 1970s. And that is now in full flight. And I don't think, Nick, even you or I, at our most pessimistic, going back to early 24, not even you and I could have predicted that. It's very, very, very disturbing.
The one person they wanted to leave and go to Dubai hasn't. It's you. You've come back to politics instead.
Well, I know. It's funny the choices we make in life. And, I'm of an age. I turned 60 last year. Had my first 2 grandkids last year. First one born on the 23rd of June, the Brexit Day anniversary. How about that? And whilst I'm not rich, far from it, I'm comfortable enough. There's nothing I need. If I make more money, I can buy a smarter car or buy a boat or a bigger house, or I'm pretty comfortable. And that gave me the freedom to make a decision that even if my head wasn't quite there, the heart definitely was. But I just think, whether it's money, whether it's society, whether it's law and order, I think many of the values that have made Great Britain, let's call it Great Britain, let's ditch the UK. Many of the values that have made Great Britain the most astonishing, geographically little country in the world are directly under threat. And I believe that with the right leadership, all of that can be turned around. And, I'm not saying it's just me. It's not just me. There is a country crying out, and they look at the Conservatives as being a bunch of charlatans, Labour as being totally incompetent. There's never been a moment in modern politics when the opportunity for something new to come through.
Nigel, hold on. Let's be honest about this, Nigel. They haven't made it very difficult for you, have they?
Be lucky with your enemies in life. All right? When my friends say, cool, Nigel, you could be the next prime minister, I always respond by saying, I know. Doesn't say much for the other lot, does it? But I mean, but whether you're a boxer, an athlete, all you can do is to try to beat the people that are against you at that moment in time, So, I do feel very lucky. Starmer, I'll tell you a story. On the 5th of July last year, he's just won a landslide in the general election. And at 11 o'clock, he stands outside Downing Street and gives the victory speech that he'd known for over a year he was going to have to give. And in the course of a 9-minute speech, he looked down at his notes 158 times. I mean, every couple of seconds he had to look down at his notes. Well, that tells you the guy believes in nothing. The Tories are all over the shop. And they can complain about illegal boat crossings. They can complain about the tax burden, but all of it happened under them. So they haven't got a leg to stand on either. So, we've got a major opportunity here. And I think, and I believe, a much more positive attitude about what can be done as opposed to what can't be done.
Well, speaking of what can't be done, you warned in January 2024 that the key risk to look out for investors was whether the UK government could borrow money cheaply enough in the gilt market or whether interest rates would spike. They have spiked. What happens next? Are we looking, I mean, the other prediction you make is that spending would be the key issue, that the Labour government would be unable to get spending under control. And this was why bond yields would spike. That's also played out. So take us through what happens next. Is the bond market going to be able to rein in Labour, and will it be spending that they go after, given tax policy is not working out so well?
Well, they tried a very modest change to the personal independence allowances the other day. Massive backbench rebellion. They've given in on that. In terms of spending, spending's completely out of control. And the public sector borrowing requirement for this year is estimated at 150 billion sterling, which, interestingly, is exactly the same figure as at the time of the 2008 bank bailouts. Okay, there's been inflation since, I know. But just looking at the numbers, April projected to be 17 billion, came in at 20. May, another 0.6 of a billion. Every single estimate of what the net borrowing spending figure is going to be is out every single month. And that's a trend that tells you that spending is out of control. And I think they're going to really struggle. I mean, what's interesting about these bond yields is in Liz Truss's time, they sort of spiked up there and everybody went potty. She was removed and it went back again. These are staying up at these numbers with no sign of them coming down. And if there is going to be, if there is going to be a general election before 2029, I suspect it's the bond market that will determine it.
How bad do things have to get in the government finances before voters respond by demanding sort of fiscal rationality? Is it going to be something like Greece where bond yields rein us in, or is it going to be something like Argentina where the government turns to the money printed to solve the problem in the short term, but causes inflation in the long term? And eventually people get sick of the inflation and vote for someone like Milei.
Yeah, no, this will be an Argentina job. I mean, the reason that Greece had discipline was it was imposed upon them by the Troika. They had no choice. They were part of the euro. I mean, Greece was effectively colonized. It was effectively colonized by globalist institutions, and they cut pensions, they cut health spending, etc. Not the Greek government itself. Now, this will be an Argentina job. You can bet your life on it. I just hope they've got the IMF on speed dial. I would put this at over 50%, that by 2027, there's going to be a major problem with the bond market. I mean, I really, really would.
So let's consider some of the reform policies that you're thinking about, how you might run the country, given how the polls are going. I guess financial markets are going to start pricing that in coming years. You mentioned that there might be an election before 2029. So this is going to start to matter a lot. How are you going to entice those people that we've lost to Dubai, the billionaires, millionaires, the taxpayers, the entrepreneurs? Yeah. How are you going to get them back?
Well, there are two things in the financial sphere that we've done already. One is to announce we'd introduce a Britannia card. The Britannia card would be £250,000 to buy and would give people it valid for 10 years. And if they take it up, 20 years of inheritance tax cover for their global assets, not their UK assets. I'm told it's too cheap. Good. If it sells like hotcakes, we'll double it after we've sold the first 10,000. Because it's the kind of thing people could buy just as an option. So that's a message that under us, you're welcome to come back to the United Kingdom. I mean, it's madness. And it isn't just the tax take. It's what they spend on stamp duty, buying houses. It's what they spend on VAT shopping. It's what they spend going out to restaurants or, going to Ascot or whatever it might be. It's the number of staff they employ. One non-dom I spoke to had 16 staff in Britain. He's left for Dubai. They're all out of work. All right. So that's the first thing we've done. The second thing we've done, which is really interesting and runs in direct contravention from what the governor of the Bank of England says, is we've also written down a proposed crypto and digital assets bill that we would write into law to say, let's make London a regulated exchange. Let's have exchange traded products on crypto, on Bitcoin. Let's accept that digital wallets are here to stay. They're not going away. So I think, it's still relatively early days, Most of my time for the last year has been building an organisation, building a party. But I hope people can see, from those two things, what the direction of travel is.
Thanks to some of the reforms that were made, the Office for Budget Responsibility has gotten a lot of power over what can be allowed in a budget and what can't. Given that economists actually disagree completely over what the policy outcome of various different policies would be, how are you going to convince the likes of the OBR that reform policies do make fiscal sense? Because I don't think they would have approved, say, the budget of Javier Milei in Argentina, despite the fact that that's been a success since, right?
Well,
so how are you going to convince them that cutting taxes could actually increase revenue because of the Laffer curve? Or how are you going to convince them that cutting net zero will actually grow the economy and result in more tax revenue? All of these sorts of debates that have been going on since the history of economics that define or should define political debate, they've sort of been taken away by just saying whatever the OBR believes is gospel. How are you going to combat that?
Yeah, well, Argentina, of course, gives us the model for what not to do, but also the model for what to do. And I think what Milei is doing is, well, frankly, heroic. Heroic. I was looking at projected growth figures for Argentina. I mean, the whole thing's a blooming miracle. It's wonderful. I think that we're going to have some really, really tough times here. George Osborne effectively set the OBR up. Reeves appears to be totally beholden to it. So the only way through something like this is you just have to say, we're going to change it. We are going to change these rules. It is ridiculous to have people like the OBR and the Treasury dictating what we can and can't do. The whole point of democracy is you can get it right through who you vote for, or you can get it wrong through who you vote for. You can't vote for the OBR, and I think they are becoming, certainly to reform voters' minds, increasingly discredited and a brake on the democratic process.
Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up question is, how can you guarantee to people who vote for you that you won't become part of the blob as soon as you're elected? Because I suppose so many people have seen so many of their political heroes, leaders over the years do a bit of a switch as soon as they're elected or in power and become a completely different person. I suspect because of the likes of who is at the OBR and the rules that govern them. How are you going to avoid that?
I'm not a career politician. I don't need to do this, right? I don't need to do this. I could be, out touring the world, catching marlin or doing whatever I want to do. I'm doing this because I'm doing this because I believe unless we get fundamental, radical, like 180 change in the political culture of this country, that the country is going to be literally ruined. And I see the degradation of our country happening very, very rapidly. So will there be barriers? Will there be obstacles? Will the blob try and stop us? Well, they're doing that already in the county councils that we won. Yes, it won't be easy. Radical change never is easy. And there'll be protests and demos and goodness knows what. But that, they are necessary battles that we're going to have to go through if we're going to win this economic war.
You mentioned the Bank of England. I think the biggest question facing British investors today is who appoints the next Bank of England governor? That'll be in 2028. The election is not scheduled until 2029, which means under current circumstances, Labour will be the one choosing the Bank of England governor, which means they will choose someone who supports their policy views and not the likes of Liz Truss policies, let alone reform. Would you agree that this is going to be a defining question for reform? Because if you cannot appoint a Bank of England governor who does back reform-style policies, then I would suggest to you that they're going to do to you what they did to Liz Truss.
I was having a very similar conversation this morning with a very, very well-known British hedge fund manager, very, very well-known, sort of almost household name. The tricks they played on Liz Truss were quite extraordinary. Quite extraordinary. We won't go into them now. It may well be that we need some changes to legislation to make that happen. But yes, who is the governor of the Bank of England is very, very important. There's a bigger, broader debate around Bank of England independence. But yeah, who the governor is key. And if we get a dud from Labour, we will have to act.
Excellent. Nigel, thanks for coming back on
and
telling us what you're going to do to the Bank of England governor. I hope they're worried.
Thank you.